The great chamber of the Galactic Council was silent. Thousands of alien delegates filled the curved seats that rose like waves toward the domed ceiling. Holographic stars floated above them, marking every world under council rule. It was a room built to remind everyone of power. And today, that power would crush humanity once and for all. Counselor Dojanru stood alone at the speaking platform. He was an old man now, his hair white and his face lined with years of service. Behind him, the seats reserved for human delegates were empty. He had told them not to come. There was no point in witnessing what was about to happen. Hi. Arbiter Velkith of the Solorian Dominion rose from his throne at the center of the chamber. His scaled skin shimmered under the lights. His yellow eyes looked down at Doyan with open contempt. The Solorians had ruled the council for 6,000 years. They saw humans as insects who had somehow learned to build starships. The vote is complete, Velkith announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. The restriction mandate passes with full authority. Effective immediately, all human vessels are banned from hyperlane travel. All human access to advanced technology is revoked. Human colonies will submit to council inspection and oversight. A wave of approval rippled through the chamber. Delegates from 100 species nodded and clicked and hummed their satisfaction. The troublesome humans would finally be put in their place. Doyan did not react. He simply waited. Velkith tilted his massive head. Does the human representative wish to speak? To beg, perhaps? I do wish to speak, Doyan said calmly. His voice was quiet, but it carried clearly through the chamber. Not to beg, simply to say goodbye. The chamber fell silent. This was not the reaction they expected. Humans were emotional creatures. They shouted, they wept. They made threats they could not keep. But this old man simply stood there, hands folded, as if he were discussing the weather. For 300 years, humanity served this council, Doyan continued. We built your stations. We repaired your ships. We designed systems that feed your worlds and power your cities. We asked only to be treated as equals. That request was denied. Again and again and again. He paused and looked around the chamber slowly, meeting the eyes of delegates who quickly looked away. We understand now. We were never going to be accepted. Not in 10 years, not in 100, not in 1,000. You see us as lesser beings, and nothing we do will ever change that. Velkith laughed, a harsh sound like stones grinding together. Finally, the humans understand their place. Yes, Doyan said softly. We understand, and so we will go. Go. Another delegate spoke up, a tall creature with 4 arms and pale blue skin. Go where? You have nowhere to go. Your worlds are within our borders. Your ships cannot travel without our hyperlanes. Doyan smiled. It was a small smile, tired and sad. You gave us 300 years to build, 300 years to learn, 300 years to prepare. He bowed his head slightly. Thank you for that time. We used it well. Before anyone could respond, he turned and walked toward the great doors. His footsteps echoed in the stunned silence. No one tried to stop him. No one knew what to say. The doors closed behind him, and humanity's voice in the Galactic Council ended forever. Far across the galaxy, Admiral Unipark stood on the bridge of the carrier ship Dawn's Edge. She was a small woman, with sharp eyes and steady hands. Around her, officers moved with quiet efficiency, monitoring screens that showed the status of humanity's entire fleet.
Counselor Rue has left the chamber,
her communications officer reported. The signal is confirmed, Una nodded. She had waited for this moment for 15 years. Begin the withdrawal. All sectors, all colonies. Execute Horizon Gate. The order went out across human space at the speed of light. On 1,000 worlds, in 10,000 stations, humans received the same message. It was time to leave. On Earth's moon, engineer Hajun Kong watched the massive gateway come to life. It was humanity's greatest secret, built in pieces across centuries, assembled in the deep dark between stars where no council sensor could reach. The gateway stood 5 kilometers tall, a ring of impossible engineering that bent space itself. Power levels stable, his assistant reported. We're ready. Ajun looked at the gateway with pride and sorrow mixed together. Start the evacuation. Civilians first. Then military. Then the cleanup crews. Ships began pouring through the gateway in an endless stream. Families who had packed their lives into small bags. Children who did not understand why they had to leave their homes. Soldiers who understood all too well. On colony worlds, humans dismantled their cities with careful precision. They left nothing useful behind. No technology. No records. No bodies. They erased every trace of their presence as if they had never existed at all. The council sent observers to watch, expecting chaos and desperation. Instead, they found calm and order. Humans walked onto transport ships with quiet dignity. They did not cry. They did not beg. They simply left. Within one standard year, it was over. 14 billion humans vanished from council space. Their worlds stood empty. Their stations floated dark and silent. Their ships were gone. High Arbiter Velkith ordered celebrations across the Silurian Dominion. He called it the cleansing balance and declared it the greatest victory in council history. Other species joined the celebration, grateful that the annoying humans were finally gone. But a few voices asked uncomfortable questions. Where did they go? How did they move so many people so quickly? Why did they leave nothing behind? Velkith dismissed these concerns. They fled into the void to die, he declared. Lesser species cannot survive without our guidance. Within a generation, they will be extinct. His advisors nodded and agreed. But late at night, some of them looked at the star maps and wondered. The humans had not panicked. They had not fought. They had simply smiled and walked away. And in all their thousands of years of ruling the galaxy, the Silurians had never seen a defeated enemy smile. Out beyond the rim of known space, past the last stars that council ships had ever visited, Admiral Unipark stood before a window that looked out on humanity's new home. A dozen worlds orbited a young yellow sun. Cities were already rising on their surfaces. They think we ran away, her first officer said. Let them think that, Una replied. Let them celebrate. Let them forget us. She turned away from the window. We have time. We have patience. And we have very, very long memories. 50 years passed, and the galaxy began to break. It started slowly. So slowly that no one noticed at first. A power grid failed on a mining colony. A terraforming station stopped working on an agricultural world. A communication relay went dark in a busy trade sector. Small problems. Minor inconveniences. Nothing that the Great Galactic Council could not handle, but the problems kept coming, and they kept getting worse. High Arbiter Velkith sat in his private chamber, older now and weaker. His scales had lost their shine. His yellow eyes were clouded with age and worry. Before him stood his chief advisor, a nervous creature who kept wringing his four hands together. The food shortage on Verith Prime has become critical, the advisor reported. 3 million citizens face starvation. The agricultural systems have completely failed. Then fix them, Velkith growled. Cannot, High Arbiter. The systems were designed by human engineers. Our technicians do not understand how they work. Every attempt to repair them has made things worse. Velkith slammed his fist on his desk. Humans have been gone for 50 years. Surely our scientists can figure out simple farming machines. The advisor hesitated. High Arbiter, the humans did not build simple machines. Their technology was integrated in ways we did not appreciate. One system connects to another, which connects to another. Pull one thread and the whole fabric falls apart. It was the same story across council space. Humans had built and maintained most of the critical infrastructure for 3 centuries. They had done it quietly, without complaint, happy to be useful. No one had bothered to learn how their systems worked. Why would they? The humans would always be there to fix things. Now, the humans were gone, and everything they built was dying, in a hidden station far beyond council borders. Ambassador Sujin Han watched the reports come in. She was middle-aged now, with gray streaks in her black hair and lines around her eyes from years of careful watching. Her job was simple: observe the council and report to the human leadership. Another famine, she said softly, scrolling through the data. Another plague. Another system failure. It is happening faster than we predicted. Technician Wu Jin-cho looked up from his monitoring station. He was a young man born in the new human territories who had never seen council space with his own eyes. Should we feel sorry for them? Sujin considered the question carefully. They enslaved us for 3 centuries. They mocked us. They tried to destroy us. But they are still living beings who are suffering. That does not answer my question. No, she admitted, it does not. Back in council space, the suffering was creating something dangerous: blame. The Solarian Dominion pointed fingers at the Veth Consortium, accusing them of sabotage. The Veth accused the Crescent Federation of stealing resources. The Crescent blamed everyone else. Old rivalries that had been buried for thousands of years clawed their way back to the surface. Border skirmishes broke out. Trade agreements collapsed. Species that had lived in peace for generations suddenly remembered ancient hatreds. And through it all, the question hung in the air like poison: where did the humans go? Velketh ordered search parties to find them. Ships traveled to the empty human worlds, looking for clues. They found nothing. The humans had erased themselves completely. Some scouts ventured into unexplored space, following faint energy signatures. Most of those ships never returned. The few that did brought back only confusion and fear. There is something out there, one captain reported, trembling before the council. We detected massive structures, cities, fleets. But when we tried to approach, our systems failed. Our weapons went offline. We could do nothing but turn around and flee. The council did not want to believe it. They convinced themselves that the humans were bluffing, building fake signals to scare them. Surely the primitive humans could not have advanced so far in just 50 years, but the fear grew anyway. In her quiet archive deep beneath the mountains of New Korea, archivist Neon Lim turned the pages of an old book. She was the keeper of human history, the guardian of memories that stretched back to a blue planet called Earth. Her archive held records of every injustice, every insult, every broken promise that the council had delivered to humanity. She called it the Ledger of Debts. "Cool, we do not forget," she whispered to herself, running her fingers over names and dates written in careful script. We never forget. The transmission came on a quiet night, encrypted in codes that only human receivers could read. Sujin decoded it herself, her hands steady despite the racing of her heart. Silence protocol activated. Target: human genetic signature. Weapon location: Council Core Vault. She read the words 3 times to make sure she understood. Then she closed her eyes and let out a long, slow breath. The silence protocol was a legend, a story told in whispers among the oldest species. An ancient weapon built by a civilization that had died before the council was born. It could target any species by their genetic code and erase them from existence. Not through a war or violence, but through something worse. Something slower. The council had found the weapon centuries ago and hidden it away. Too afraid to use it, too greedy to destroy it. Now, desperate and paranoid, Velketh had decided to activate it against humanity. "They are actually going to do it," Sujin whispered. "They are going to wake it up." She sent an urgent message to human leadership, flagged with the highest priority. Then she sat in the darkness of her station and waited, far away. In the gleaming halls of the human capital, the message arrived on Admiral Unipark's desk. She was old now, her hair completely white, her body frail, but her mind still sharp as a blade. She read Sujin's report and smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had waited 50 years for their enemy to make exactly this mistake. "Get me Dr. Min Ji-yoon," she ordered. "Tell her it is time to open the Prometheus file." The weapon the council was about to fire had been built by a dead civilization. Yes, but it had never been finished. The original builders had fallen before they could complete it. For 300 years, while humans served the council as engineers and laborers, they had secretly accessed the weapons core systems. They had studied it, improved it, and most importantly, it changed it. The Council thought they were about to destroy humanity. They had no idea what they were about to unleash upon themselves. Inner Archive. Neon Lim added a new entry to the ledger of debts. She wrote the date, the details of the Silence Protocol activation, and a single sentence at the bottom: payment comes due. The weapon woke in the darkness of the Council core vault. For 10,000 years it had slept, dreaming of the civilization that had built it and the purpose it was meant to serve. It was not alive, not in any way that biological creatures would understand. But it was aware. It remembered High Arbiter Velkith stood before the activation chamber, surrounded by his most trusted guards and scientists. The weapon filled the massive room, a structure of black metal and pulsing lights that seemed to drink in the air around it. Just looking at it made his scales itch with discomfort. "You are certain this will work?" he asked the chief scientist, a thin Silurian who had spent his entire life studying ancient technologies. "The targeting system has been programmed with human genetic markers," the scientist replied. "Once activated, the weapon will spread across space itself, seeking out every individual who carries those markers. Within a generation, no human will be able to reproduce. Within 2 generations, they will be extinct." "And there is no defense? No way for them to stop it?" The scientist shook his head. "The original builders designed this weapon to be unstoppable. Even they could not undo its effects once activated. That is why they never used it themselves." Velkith nodded slowly. He thought of the empty human worlds, the mysterious signals from beyond the rim, the fear that had crept into his hearts over the past 50 years. He thought of how the humans had smiled as they walked away from the Council. That smile had haunted his dreams ever since. "Activate it," he commanded. The scientist hesitated for just a moment. Something in the weapon's ancient code had always bothered him, small irregularities that did not match the original design. But he had reported his concerns years ago and been ignored. Now it was too late for second thoughts. He pressed the activation sequence. The weapon hummed to life. Lights raced along its surface, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. The air in the chamber grew thick and heavy. Every creature present felt a pressure in their minds, as if something vast and old was looking at them. Then the weapon fired. It did not shoot beams of light or launch missiles. It simply reached out through space itself, spreading like a wave across the galaxy. The scientists cheered. Velkith allowed himself a thin smile of triumph. The smile lasted exactly 4 seconds. Warning alarms began screaming throughout the vault. The weapon's lights changed color, shifting from cold blue to angry red. The chief scientist stared at his readings in horror. "This is impossible," he whispered. "The targeting system has been altered. The genetic markers have been changed." Velkith grabbed him by the throat. "Changed to what?" "To us," the scientist choked out. "To everyone. Every species in the Council database. The weapon is not targeting humans. It is targeting us." Far across the galaxy, in the command center of humanity's hidden capital, Dr. Minji-Yoon watched the data streams with calm satisfaction. She was a small woman with steady hands and eyes that had seen too much. For 30 years, she had led Project Prometheus, humanity's contingency plan against exactly this moment. "Confirmation received," her assistant reported. "The weapon has activated with modified parameters. Council species are now the primary targets." Fleet Admiral Sun Woobeek stood beside her, his arms crossed over his chest. He was a large man, with a face like carved stone, famous for his patience and his ruthlessness in equal measure. "How long until they realize what has happened?" "They already know," Minji replied. "But knowing will not help them. We spent 300 years modifying that weapon while we served them as engineers. We knew every system, every failsafe, every line of code. When they gave us access to maintain their infrastructure, they gave us the keys to their own destruction. And there is truly no way to reverse it." Minji shook her head. "The original builders made sure of that. Once the weapon activates, it cannot be stopped. We simply changed who it targets." In the Council core vault, chaos had erupted. Velkith screamed orders that no one could follow. Scientists scrambled to shut down the weapon, but every command they entered was rejected. The weapon had its instructions now. It would not stop until those instructions were complete. The effect would not be immediate. That was the cruel genius of the weapon's design. It did not kill. It did not destroy. It simply reached into the genetic code of its targets and made one small change. A change that would make reproduction impossible within a few generations. The council species would not die today. They would not die tomorrow. They would simply stop having children. And slowly, over centuries, they would fade away. Captain Inho Asio was young for a ship commander, only 32 years old. He had been born in the new human territories and had never known life under council rule. But he had grown up on stories of the oppression his parents and grandparents had suffered. He understood why this moment mattered. His ship, the Pale Dawn, dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of council territory. It was a small vessel, built for speed rather than combat. Its only purpose today was to deliver a message. "Open a channel," Inho ordered. "Broadcast on all frequencies." His communications officer obeyed. Across 17 council homeworlds, screens flickered to life. Billions of aliens looked up to see a human face for the first time in 50 years. Inho spoke clearly and slowly, making sure every word was understood. 50 years ago, you cast us out. You told us we were lesser beings who did not deserve to share your galaxy. You celebrated when we left? You called it the cleansing balance. He paused, letting the words sink in. Now you have activated a weapon meant to erase us from existence. A weapon that we modified while we served you. A weapon that now targets you instead. In the council chambers, Velkith watched the broadcast with wide, terrified eyes. His guards stood frozen. His advisors wept. You wanted silence, Inho continued. You wanted a galaxy without humans. We will give you what you wanted, but not in the way you imagined. He leaned forward slightly, his young face hard with 3 centuries of inherited anger. You will have your silence. We will make sure of it. The transmission ended. The Pale Dawn vanished back into hyperspace before any council ship could respond. In her archive,
Archivist
Neon Lim received word of the broadcast. She opened the ledger of debts and drew a single line through the oldest entry. The one that recorded humanity's first acceptance into the council as junior members. Debt acknowledged, she wrote beside it. Payment in progress. Dr. Minji Yoon stood at her window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, billions of aliens were learning that their future had been stolen from them. Their children would have no children. Their civilizations would slowly empty. Their great halls would fall silent. Do you feel anything? Admiral Sun Wu asked, joining her at the window. Minji considered the question for a long moment. I feel tired, she finally said. I feel old. I feel the weight of what we have done. But not regret? She turned to look at him, her eyes dry and clear. They tried to erase us. They tried to end our existence. We simply returned the favor. She looked back at the stars. If that makes us monsters, then so be it. At least we are monsters who survived. The galaxy burned with despair. 20 years had passed since the weapon fired. 20 years of watching birth rates fall across every council world. 20 years of scientists working desperately to find a cure that did not exist. 20 years of hope slowly dying. High Arbiter Velkith was dead now, taken by age and shame. His successors had tried everything. They had begged. They had threatened. They had sent warships toward human space, only to watch those ships lose power and drift helplessly into the void. Humanity had built defenses that the Council could not even understand, let alone defeat. Now the remaining Council leaders had gathered for one final meeting. Their great chamber, once filled with thousands of delegates, held barely 100. Many species had already retreated to their homeworlds. Waiting for the end in solitude, the doors opened and a human walked in. He was an older man with gray hair and a calm face. He wore simple clothes, not a military uniform or diplomatic robes. He looked like someone's grandfather, not a representative of the species that had doomed them all. My name is Operative Tyon Moon, he said, his voice carrying easily through the silent chamber. I have lived among you for 40 years. I watched you celebrate our departure. I watched you plan our destruction. I watched you activate the weapon. The delegates stirred uneasily. A human spy had lived among them for decades, and they had never known. I am here to deliver a message from Elder Kungsu Park, High Chancellor of the Human Commonwealth. Taeyeon pulled out a small device and activated it. A hologram appeared above the speaking platform, showing an elderly human man with kind eyes and a serious expression. Elder Kungsu had been born under council rule, had lived through the Exodus, had helped build humanity's new civilization from nothing. Now he led billions of humans who had never known oppression. People of the council, the hologram spoke. You are facing extinction. Your children are fewer each generation. Your cities grow empty. Your future grows dark. This is the consequence of your choices, the payment for centuries of cruelty. Some delegates looked away in shame. Others stared at the hologram with hatred. But we are not like you, Kungsu continued. We could watch you fade away. We could celebrate as you once celebrated our departure. Many of my people want exactly that. But I did not lead humanity through its darkest hour, just to become the monster you always believed we were. The chamber grew very still. We have developed a cure. Our scientists have found a way to reverse the weapon's effects. We can save your species. We can give you back your future. A murmur of desperate hope rippled through the delegates, but there are conditions. Hope turned cold. First, every species that wishes to be cured must surrender unconditionally to human oversight. You will disarm your military forces. You will open your worlds to human inspection. You will accept human governors to ensure compliance. Second, you will pay reparations for 3 centuries of exploitation, not in resources or money, but in service. Your people will help build new worlds, repair old damage, create the infrastructure for a new galactic order. Third, you will teach your children the truth, not the lies you told about humanity being lesser beings. The truth about what you did and why you fell. Every generation must know, so that it never happens again. The hologram paused, and Kyungsu's expression softened slightly. These terms are harsh. I know that. But they are also fair. You tried to erase us from existence. We are offering you survival in exchange for submission. That is more mercy than you ever showed us. The hologram faded. Taeyeon stood alone in the center of the chamber, waiting. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a Veth delegate rose slowly to his feet. He was old, one of the few who remembered the days when humans had served the council. We accept, he said, his voice breaking. May our ancestors forgive us, but we accept. One by one, other species joined him. Not all of them. Some refused, choosing to die free rather than live under human rule. The Silurian remnant was among them, too proud to bow even in the face of extinction. We understand, Taeyeon said to those who refuse. You have made your choice. We will not force the cure upon you, but we will remember your dignity even as we mourn your passing. Commander Yoonji Chai led the humanitarian fleet that arrived at the first surrendering world. She was a woman in her 40s, practical and efficient, with no patience for politics, but deep reserves of compassion. Her job was simple: distribute the cure and begin the reconstruction. She expected hatred when her ships landed. She expected resistance, sabotage, violence. Instead, she found something more disturbing: gratitude. Aliens who had spent their lives believing humans were inferior creatures now bowed before her. Children who had never seen a human before stared at her with wonder and fear. Leaders who had once voted to destroy humanity now begged for her approval. Stand up, she told a group of Veth officials who had prostrated themselves before her. We did not come here to be worshipped. We came here to help. Stand up and help us do our job. It took time for them to understand. Humans did not want slaves. They did not want revenge. They wanted something much harder to give: genuine change. On the worlds that accepted human terms, life slowly returned to normal. The cure worked exactly as promised. Birth rates stabilized. Children were born. The future began to brighten. Human governors proved to be strict but fair. They punished corruption and cruelty, but they also built schools and hospitals. They taught alien children human history, not to shame them, but to help them understand. Your ancestors made terrible choices, a human teacher told a class of young Krishan students, but you are not your ancestors. You can choose differently. That is what we hope for. Not every interaction was so gentle. Some humans who remembered the old days carried hatred in their hearts. Some aliens who remembered their former power resented every moment of submission. There were incidents, conflicts, even deaths. But slowly, painfully, something new began to grow. Elder Kungsu addressed the human people on the anniversary of the weapons activation. He stood in the great plaza of the human capital, surrounded by millions who had come to hear him speak. They made us into monsters in their stories, he said. For 300 years, they told their children that humans were dangerous, violent, untrustworthy. They used those stories to justify our oppression. He looked out at the faces before him, human faces that had known suffering and survival and triumph. We chose to become something else. We could have destroyed them completely. We could have taken revenge that matched their cruelty. Instead, we became patient. We waited. We prepared. And when the moment came, we offered mercy alongside justice. His voice grew heavy with emotion. Some will say, we were too kind. Some will say we were not kind enough. History will judge us in ways we cannot predict. But I know this. Our children will inherit a galaxy where humanity is not a victim. We will be builders, leaders, guardians of a new order. He paused and looked up at the stars. Its impatience, in the end, proved to be the cruelest weapon of all. Not because it destroyed our enemies, but because it forced them to live with what they had done. In the crowd, Commander Yunji listened to his words. She thought of the alien children she had seen, children who might grow up never knowing the hatred their grandparents had felt. She thought of the human children who might grow up never knowing what it meant to be oppressed. Maybe that is enough, she whispered to herself. Maybe that is the only victory that matters. 200 years had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council. The old council was gone now, dissolved into history like morning fog. In its place stood something new, the Commonwealth Alliance, a union of species bound not by conquest, but by necessity. And at its heart, guiding and protecting, stood humanity. President Jisu Han looked out the window of the new council chamber at the gardens below. She was the great-great-granddaughter of Ambassador Sujin Han, who had watched the old council crumble from her hidden station. Jisoo had never known that world of hatred and fear. She had grown up in an era of rebuilding, of healing, of hope. But she carried the weight of history on her shoulders every day. The memorial ceremony begins in 1 hour, her assistant reminded her. The delegations from 12 species have already arrived. Jesu nodded without turning from the window. Today marked the 200th anniversary of the Exodus, the day humanity had walked away from everything they had known. It was a day of remembrance, of reflection, of questions that had no easy answers. Below her, in the gardens that surrounded the new council chamber, children played together. Human children, Veth children, Kratian children. Species that had once hated each other now shared playgrounds and classrooms and dreams. Counselor Yaren Beek entered the office quietly. She was Jisoo's closest advisor, the granddaughter of Fleet Admiral Sun Woo Beek, who had commanded humanity's armada during the darkest days. Yaren had inherited her grandfather's patience and his strategic mind, but she had dedicated those gifts to peace rather than war. You seem troubled, Yaren observed. I received a message this morning, Jisoo said. From the Silurian remnant. Yaren's expression grew careful. The Silurians had refused humanity's terms 200 years ago. They had chosen extinction over submission. Most of them were gone now, their great civilization reduced to a handful of scattered colonies where the last generations lived out their final years. What did they want? To be remembered. Jisoo finally turned from the window. Her eyes were tired but clear. Their leader, the last of Velkath S-Line, sent a recording. He wanted to explain why they made the choice they did. And what did he say? That pride is a poor substitute for survival. that his ancestors were fools, that he hopes history will remember them not as monsters, but as a warning. Aaron was silent for a moment. Do you think that is true? That they were just proud fools? Jisoo walked to her desk and sat down heavily. I think they were afraid. Afraid of a galaxy where they were not in control. Afraid of admitting that they had been wrong for thousands of years. Sometimes fear makes people choose death over change. And what will you say at the ceremony? The delegations will expect wisdom. I will tell them the truth. That we are not finished. That peace is not a destination, but a journey. That every generation must choose again whether to build or destroy. In a different part of the city, historian Borakong prepared for her own role in the day's events. She was the keeper of human memory now, successor to archivist Naeon Lim, guardian of the ledger of debts. But the ledger had changed over 2 centuries. The pages of grievances had been joined by pages of reconciliation, debts acknowledged and paid, wounds addressed and healed. The book had grown thick with the complicated history of species learning to live together. Bora's students gathered around her as she opened the ledger for their lesson. What do you see when you look at this book? She asked them. A young human boy raised his hand. The history of our people, a Crussian girl beside him added. The history of all our peoples. Oh. Bora smiled. Both answers are correct, but look deeper. What does this book really tell us? The students were quiet, thinking. It tells us that nothing is permanent, Bora said finally. Not hatred. It's not fear. Not even extinction. 200 years ago, my ancestors believed they might never see their enemies again. Now, your ancestors sit beside my students in this classroom. The future is never what we expect. She turned to a page near the end of the ledger, where fresh entries had been written in recent years. These were not debts, but gifts, acts of kindness between species, collaborations that had created new technologies, friendships that had grown across the old divides. We keep this book not to remember hatred, but to remember that hatred can end. Every entry is proof that change is possible. The memorial ceremony took place in the Grand Plaza, a vast open space at the heart of the human capital. Millions watched, both in person and through broadcasts that reached every corner of the galaxy. President Jisoo walked to the speaking platform, her footsteps echoing in the expectant silence. Behind her stood representatives from every species in the Commonwealth Alliance. Before her stretched a sea of faces, human and alien, old and young, all waiting to hear what she would say. 200 years ago, my ancestors walked away from everything they knew, she began. They left behind their homes, their history, their place in the galaxy. They walked away because they had no other choice. The old council had decided that humanity had no future. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. The council was wrong. Humanity had a future. We built it ourselves, in the darkness beyond the rim, where no one thought we could survive. We built cities and fleets and dreams. And when the old council fell, we built something else, a new way for species to live together. Her voice grew stronger. But we must never forget what happened. Not to celebrate our victory, but to remember how icy hatred can destroy. The old council was not evil. They were afraid. They were proud. They were blind to the consequences of their choices. And in the end, they destroyed themselves. She looked out at the mixed crowd, at the children who had never known a galaxy divided by species. We carry that lesson forward, not as a weapon, but as a warning. Every generation must choose again. Will we build or destroy? Will we reach out or pull away? Will we see each other as threats or as possibilities? The recording of High Arbiter Valkathes' final words played across the plaza, his ancient voice crackling with age and regret. We feared their passion, he said, their chaos, their stubborn refusal to accept their place. We should have feared their memory. When the recording ended, Jisoo spoke again. He was right to fear our memory, but he was wrong about why. We remembered not to take revenge, but to build something better. We remembered not to hate, but to hope. We remembered because forgetting would have meant losing ourselves. The ceremony ended with a moment of silence for all who had been lost, humans who had died under council rule, aliens who had perished in the chaos that followed, the Silurians and others who had chosen extinction over change. Afterward, Jisoo stood at the window of her office once more, watching the crowds disperse. Counselor Yaren joined her, and for a long time they simply watched the gardens below in comfortable silence. "Do you think they will forgive us someday?" Yaren asked finally. "The species we saved but also conquered?" "No," Jisoo replied quietly. "Forgiveness is too much to ask. We did what was necessary, but we also did what was cruel. Those two things can be true at the same time, and what hope is there?" Jisoo watched the children in the gardens. A human girl was teaching a Veth boy how to climb a tree. A Cretan child was sharing food with a group of mixed-species friends. They laughed and played without any awareness of the history that had nearly prevented their existence. "Their children might forget," Jisoo said softly. "Not forget the history, but forget the hatred. They might grow up in a galaxy where species being equal is simply normal, where cooperation is simply how things work, where the old divisions are just stories in a book." She turned to Yaren with something like peace in her eyes. "Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps forgetting the hatred while remembering the lesson is the best we can hope for." Below them, the children kept playing. The sun moved slowly across the sky. The galaxy turned on, carrying its burden of history and hope toward a future that no one could predict. And somewhere, in the quiet depths of space, a small memorial floated among the stars. It marked the spot where humanity had first gathered before their exodus, where billions had looked back at everything they were leaving behind. The memorial carried only 5 words, carved in stone that would outlast civilizations. "We survived. We remember. We hope."